My name is Mark, and for 20 years I believed that my marriage to Julia was a fortress built on unwavering love and trust. We shared a home filled with laughter, shared dreams, and the quiet certainty that we would face life's challenges together. When Julia stepped forward to care for Edward, a lonely, frail man whose life had been marred by loss and isolation, I never doubted her intentions. I saw it as a noble act of compassion, a testament to her kind heart and her sense of duty to those in need. At first, everything seemed as it should. Edward was a gentle soul with a past filled with bittersweet memories, and Julia devoted her days to ensuring he was comfortable. She arranged his medications, made sure his meals were nutritious, and spent long afternoons reading him stories from books he cherished in his youth. In our quiet suburban home, the days passed in an almost idyllic rhythm, a careful balance between our family life and the compassion she showed toward an old man who had lost his way. But slowly, subtle discrepancies began to weave themselves into the tapestry of our life. Julia would return from visiting Edward's modest apartment later than usual, her eyes distant as if lost in thought. There were moments when I noticed her clutching small, secretive packages that she quickly tucked away when I walked into the room. I assumed these were merely tokens of gratitude from Edward's family or perhaps medication supplies that she preferred not to display. My trust in her was so deeply rooted that I never questioned the fleeting uncertainties. Over time, however, the small oddities accumulated. I started to observe that Julia's conversations about Edward, once filled with gentle details of his care, began to carry an undercurrent of passion. She would describe his eyes with a wistfulness that was incongruent with the role of a caregiver. In the quiet moments of the night, when I lay awake in our bed, the whispers of my doubts grew louder. I recalled instances of hushed phone calls, half-observed gestures as she left the house, and the soft, secretive smiles that she exchanged with someone who was not me. Yet I clung to the belief that my wife was simply dedicated to her duty, that the lines of professional care and personal compassion might sometimes blur in the service of kindness. It wasn't until I accidentally discovered a misplaced letter tucked inside one of her worn notebooks that the veil began to lift. The letter, penned in a delicate script, was addressed to my dearest Edward and spoke of longing and desire that no caretaker should ever express. The words were intimate, bordering on poetic, and they hinted at a connection far beyond the confines of duty. I held the letter trembling in my hand, my heart pounding in disbelief. Had I been so blind to the subtle cues? The loving wife who had always been my partner now seemed to hide an entirely different self, a self that belonged to a forbidden realm of passion. The shock of this discovery initiated a cascade of thoughts that roiled through me day and night. I began to retrace every moment we had shared, questioning each smile, every lingering touch. I recalled how, during family gatherings, Julia would sometimes glance away as if she were picturing someone else. The certainty of our shared life now felt like a fragile illusion, easily shattered by the truth I had unearthed. I kept the letter hidden, uncertain if confronting Julia immediately would destroy all that we had built, yet I could no longer live with the disquiet gnawing at my soul. In the following days, I found myself torn between duty to the man I loved and the overwhelming need for the truth. I tried to distract myself with work and daily routines, yet every quiet moment brought with it memories of the secret letter and the ambiguous warmth in Julia's eyes when she spoke of Edward. I felt betrayed not only by the act itself, but by the slow erosion of trust that had been the foundation of our marriage. I was left to wonder how someone I had so adored could harbor such hidden depths that now threatened to pull us both into an abyss of deceit. During one restless night, as I sat in the silence of our living room, I resolved to gather my thoughts and evidence before confronting Julia. I began to collect any scraps of information, old letters, subtle notes on her phone, even photographs that seemed to capture moments of intimacy between her and Edward. I was careful not to disturb the delicate balance of our home life, yet inside, I was preparing for a confrontation that I both dreaded and needed. The more I gathered, the more the realization crystallized that Julia's relationship with Edward was not born solely of altruism, but had blossomed into a secret passion, one that defied the sanctity of our vows. In that moment, I realized that the woman I loved had become a stranger in many ways. Her compassion, once a beacon of light, now shone with an intensity that threatened to burn away all our shared memories. I understood that the betrayal was not just a simple act of infidelity, it was the erosion of a sacred trust that had been built over decades. My heart ached with the knowledge that while I had offered my unwavering support to her noble mission of caregiving, she had, in secret, allowed herself to be swept away by desires that belonged to another world. a world where love and care had morphed into something dangerously passionate and forbidden. As I pinned my thoughts in a worn journal by the light of a single lamp, I realized that the path ahead was fraught with painful choices. I had to decide whether to confront Julia immediately and risk shattering the fragile remnants of our past, or to try to understand the depths of her betrayal before letting the truth unravel our lives entirely. The journal became both a repository for my sorrow and a roadmap for the difficult journey ahead, a journey that would test the limits of my endurance and force me to confront the very essence of trust and love. That night, with the cool breeze of early autumn whispering through the half-open window, I made my silent promise to myself. I would uncover the full extent of Julia's hidden world, no matter how devastating the truth might be. The discovery of the forbidden letter had cracked open a door into a realm I had never imagined, a realm where duty and desire collided in the most unexpected way. And so, as the darkness of the night slowly gave way to the uncertain light of dawn, I steeled myself for the inevitable confrontation that would follow, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. In the weeks that followed the discovery of that heart-wrenching letter, my mind became a battleground of conflicting emotions, doubt, betrayal, and an overwhelming need for answers. I started to observe Julia with a new, scrutinizing gaze, dissecting every word and gesture in search of clues that might confirm my worst fears. Our home, once a sanctuary of shared happiness, now felt laden with secrets and unspoken tension. Each morning, I awoke with the gnawing certainty that something was terribly wrong, yet I forced myself to follow the routine of our daily life. I went to work, attended meetings, and returned home with the hope that the normalcy of the day might quell the storm raging inside me. But every familiar corner of our home, each photograph on the wall, every piece of furniture lovingly arranged, served as a stark reminder of a promise that had been betrayed. I felt isolated within my own life, trapped by the weight of revelations that I could no longer keep to myself. I began to document every detail, quietly jotting down observations and even going through old messages on our shared devices. In my careful investigation, I discovered inconsistencies in Julia's explanations regarding her time spent with Edward. What had initially seemed like innocent conversations about caregiving were now laced with an intensity that went far beyond compassion. The more I uncovered, the more I felt the cold hand of betrayal tighten around my heart. One evening, as twilight draped our home in a somber glow, I confronted a moment that would forever change the course of my life. I returned home early from a meeting, determined to speak with Julia before her next visit to Edward's apartment. The house was eerily quiet, and I could almost hear the echo of my own thoughts in the stillness. In the living room, I found her seated at the table, a cup of tea cooling beside her. The sight of her, so serene on the surface, belied the turbulence I sensed within. "Julia," I said softly, my voice steadier than I felt, "we need to talk." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw the hesitation of fear, regret, and something else I couldn't quite name. I took a deep breath and slowly laid out the evidence I had gathered, the letter, snippets of conversations, and the myriad inconsistencies that now formed an undeniable mosaic of betrayal. With each piece of evidence, the room grew colder, the distance between us widening as the truth began to seep into every corner of our shared life. "I never meant for you to find out this way," she murmured, her voice trembling as if each word carried the weight of an unbearable secret. Her eyes, once so full of warmth and promise, now shone with unshed tears and guilt. "I did what I felt I had to do, to be needed," she continued, as if explaining a choice made under duress rather than a betrayal of our vows. The shock of her confession left me speechless, the room filled with a heavy silence punctuated only by the sound of my racing heart. I demanded to know how long this had been going on, how many times had I been deceived while she nurtured this forbidden relationship. With a pained look, she admitted that her connection with Edward had begun innocently, driven by her compassion for his loneliness and despair. Over time, however, that connection deepened into an intimacy that neither of us had anticipated. Each word she spoke was like a chisel striking the stone of my heart, carving away the remnants of trust that had taken decades to build. I recalled the moments when Julia's eyes would linger on the phone screen, when her hands would tremble as she reached for a package she insisted was merely medication. In those moments, the truth had been hidden in plain sight, buried beneath layers of duty and unspoken longing. Now, with every painful admission, the facade of our marriage crumbled further. I could see that Julia was torn between two worlds, the one where she was a devoted wife and mother, and the one where she was free to indulge in a passion that defied societal boundaries. The dichotomy was as tragic as it was shocking. A woman who had once vowed to protect our family had allowed herself to be consumed by a forbidden desire. In that moment of raw honesty, the chasm between us seemed both insurmountable and achingly real. The conversation dragged on into the long hours of the night. I listened as she recounted the loneliness that had driven her to seek solace in Edward's company, the comfort she had found in the gentle words and kind gestures that he offered. It was a confession filled with sorrow and regret, a confession that did little to mend the shattered trust between us. The intimacy that we had once shared had been replaced by a painful awareness of how deeply I had been deceived. By the time the conversation drew to a reluctant close, I knew that our lives would never be the same. I was left with a sense of numbness, a hollow despair that spread through every fiber of my being. I retreated into silence, each moment heavy with the realization that the woman I loved was now a stranger. The evidence of her betrayal was undeniable, and the promise of a future built on trust had been shattered in a single, heart-wrenching night. That evening, as I sat alone in the darkened study, I pondered the cruel irony of our situation. Julia's noble act of caregiving had masked a secret that would prove to be our undoing. The facade of duty had been nothing more than a veil, hiding a passion that defied all logic and morality. And so, in the quiet solitude of that night, I resolved to face the truth head-on, no matter how painful the path ahead might be. In the days that followed the painful confrontation, I found myself plunged into an emotional abyss, a dark and turbulent space where every memory of our past life clashed with the bitter truth of Julia's betrayal. The warmth of our home had turned cold, and the echoes of laughter that once filled the rooms were now replaced by a silence that screamed of loss and despair. I was caught between clinging to the remnants of a love I once cherished and the stark reality of a future irrevocably marred by deceit. I began to isolate myself, retreating into the solitude of long, sleepless nights. The light of day brought no solace, only a painful reminder of the lie that had been woven into every corner of our shared life. I wandered through our home as a ghost, haunted by images of happier times, each photograph, every familiar scent, a cruel reminder of what had been lost. My thoughts turned obsessively toward the forbidden affair, replaying in my mind the quiet moments when Julia's eyes betrayed her inner turmoil, the secret smiles that hinted at passions hidden away from me. In the solitude of my despair, I turned to writing. My journal became the only confidant, a silent witness to the avalanche of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. Page after page, I poured out the anguish, the shock, and the relentless questioning of how someone I had trusted so implicitly could become so deeply entangled in a forbidden world. The words flowed like a torrent, each sentence a desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of control in a life that had suddenly become unrecognizable. I began to analyze every detail of my life with Julia, every whispered promise, every tender moment of care she had once shown me, and now each seemed tainted by the knowledge of her secret desire. The tenderness with which she once nurtured Edward, the gentle way she would comfort him in his moments of sorrow, now appeared as a facade for a deeper, more dangerous intimacy. It was as if the very act of caregiving had become the vehicle through which she allowed herself to escape, to live out a forbidden fantasy that defied every moral boundary I had ever known. Friends and family tried to reach out, but I found it impossible to share the depth of my inner turmoil. How could I explain that the foundation of my entire world had been undermined not by a stranger, but by the woman I had sworn to love and honor? The betrayal was too complex, too wrapped in layers of compassion and forbidden longing, to be easily understood. I felt alone in a crowd, a prisoner of a secret that had consumed my every thought. In my darkest moments, I sought refuge in long walks through the empty streets at night, each step an attempt to escape the suffocating memories that clung to me like shadows. The cool night air offered a temporary reprieve from the torment, but the solitude only magnified the ache of betrayal. I questioned whether the love I once believed in had been nothing more than an illusion, a carefully constructed lie that had been shattered by the raw truth of Julia's desires. The days turned into a blur of numb routine and intermittent bursts of agonizing clarity. I found myself oscillating between a desperate need for revenge and a futile yearning for the old life that had slipped irretrievably away. The internal conflict was as chaotic as it was relentless. I realized that the path forward was unclear, each moment filled with the possibility of healing, yet also weighed down by the enormity of the deception. Yet, amid the overwhelming darkness, I clung to a faint hope that time might eventually bring clarity. I began to attend counseling sessions, seeking to understand not only my own feelings but also the psychology behind Julia's actions. In those sessions, I learned that the line between care and passion could sometimes blur, especially in the fragile space where loneliness and desire intersect. Though these insights did little to mend the raw wound of betrayal, they offered a glimpse into the complex human emotions that had led us both astray. As the weeks passed, I attempted to reassemble the shattered pieces of my identity. I reconnected with old friends, slowly learning that while the betrayal had scarred me deeply, it did not have to define my entire existence. Each small step, whether it was sharing a laugh with a trusted friend or rediscovering a long-forgotten hobby, served as a reminder that life, despite its pain, could still offer moments of beauty and redemption. In the midst of this internal struggle, I continued to search for answers about the man who had become a silent, forbidden presence in our home. Edward, the elderly soul for whom Julia had once offered nothing but care, had become an unwilling participant in a drama that defied reason. I wrestled with conflicting emotions, anger that he had inadvertently become a catalyst for this betrayal, and a deep sadness that a connection born of compassion could so easily spiral into something dangerous. In every conversation I recalled, every tender moment Julia had shared with him, I now saw the seeds of a passion that had blossomed in secrecy, a passion that had ultimately cost me everything I had held dear. Every night, as I sat by the dim light of a bedside lamp, I promised myself that I would eventually confront the full truth of our situation. I knew that the path to healing lay in facing the deepest parts of my pain, and daring to understand how a woman so dear to me could slip into a realm of forbidden intimacy. And so, with a heavy heart and a resolve born of desperation, I prepared for the inevitable confrontation that would force Julia and me to lay bare all our secrets, no matter how shattering the truth might be. The confrontation that followed my internal struggle came on a cold, rain-soaked evening. The air was thick with tension as I invited Julia to sit with me in our dimly lit study, the room where I had recorded so many of my darkest thoughts. It was time to face the undeniable truth. Our lives had been forever altered by a betrayal that reached beyond the bounds of conventional infidelity. I needed to know why she had let her compassion for Edward mutate into a dangerous, forbidden desire, and whether there was any hope left for us after the shattering of our marital vows. Julia arrived quietly, her eyes downcast and heavy with sorrow. The sight of her made my heart tighten with grief and anger. I began by asking her once more to recount the progression of her relationship with Edward, from the innocent beginnings of caregiving to the illicit moments of passion that had erupted in secret. Her voice wavered as she described the isolation that had driven her to seek solace in the quiet, attentive presence of an old man whose gentle nature had filled the void left by years of feeling unseen in our bustling home. She spoke of nights spent in whispered conversations with him, of glances exchanged that carried unspoken promises, and of a growing intimacy that she had tried desperately to suppress. Every word was a dagger, each confession a reminder of a love that had been betrayed. I listened in a state of stunned disbelief, feeling both the searing pain of loss and a perverse need to understand the depths of her deception. The room, filled with the murmurs of our shared past, now bore witness to the collapse of everything we had built together. As Julia's story unfolded, I began to see the complexity behind her actions, a tapestry of loneliness, yearning for validation, and the irresistible allure of a forbidden romance that defied all moral boundaries. I realized that the woman I had loved was not entirely evil. She had been lost in a labyrinth of emotions and unmet needs. Yet, that realization did little to ease the raw ache of betrayal. I was forced to confront the fact that while her actions might have been born of a deep sense of isolation, they had irreparably damaged the trust between us. In the days that followed the confrontation, our home became a silent battleground of shattered dreams and painful introspection. Julia retreated into herself, consumed by remorse and regret, while I grappled with a maelstrom of anger, sadness, and a desperate desire for reconciliation. I tried to rebuild the fragments of our relationship, attempting to understand whether there was a way to heal the rift that had grown too wide. I sought counseling, both individually and as a couple, and in those sessions, we unearthed long-buried wounds and unspoken grievances. Yet, the forbidden love that had taken root in the shadows of our home lingered as an ever-present specter, a painful reminder that our lives had been irrevocably changed. In quiet moments of reflection, I wondered whether forgiveness was possible, whether I could ever learn to trust again after the betrayal that had cut so deeply into the fabric of my being. I revisited memories of our happier times, of laughter shared over simple dinners, and the promise of tomorrow that once lit our eyes with hope. Though those memories now carried a tinge of melancholy, they also served as a reminder that love, in all its forms, is both fragile and resilient. As weeks turned into months, I began to rebuild my identity piece by piece. I reconnected with old friends, found solace in my hobbies, and slowly allowed the pain to shape me rather than consume me. Though the scars of betrayal would remain forever, I learned that they did not have to define my entire future. Each day became a cautious step toward a life where the lessons of the past informed a wiser, if more cautious, approach to love and trust. The aftermath of that forbidden affair brought with it a bittersweet realization that in the depths of our shared tragedy, there existed a fragile possibility of redemption. Julia, for her part, began a long, painful journey towards self-forgiveness, striving to reconcile the woman she had been with the choices she had made. Our conversations, though laden with sorrow, gradually shifted from accusations to tentative explorations of how we might rebuild, if not the love we once knew, then at least a semblance of mutual respect and understanding. In the end, I came to accept that some betrayals leave indelible marks that time cannot fully erase. The affair with Edward, born of a twisted blend of care and forbidden desire, had irreparably altered the course of our lives. Yet, even as I bore the heavy burden of loss, I recognized that the path forward lay in embracing the truth and finding a way to live with the complexities of human frailty. Our marriage was forever changed, but in that change lay the possibility of forging a new, albeit scarred, future. As I continue my journey, I hold on to the hope that redemption is possible, not in the erasure of the past, but in the acceptance of its lessons. The forbidden love that once shattered our promises has become a painful chapter in our story, a chapter that, while marked by betrayal and heartache, has also revealed the resilient nature of the human spirit. And so, with cautious optimism, I move forward, determined to honor both the love that once was and the hard-won wisdom that now guides me through the aftermath of forbidden passion.